Hi, everybody. I'm Amy Archer with PARE Corporation. We're the consultant working with the town of Mattapoisett to advance Phase 2A of their community path, bike path. This is a rail to trail conversion predominantly. There are a couple of areas where we will be on roadway or crossing roadways that we're looking at for how we need to treat those crossings for pedestrian safety, bicyclist safety, and vehicle awareness. I'll share my screen and walk you through the overall project limits, things that we've assessed so far, and our status with preparing the final elements of the 25% for MassDOT's review. So this project will be just over a mile. It picks up at Depot Street, just north of where segment 1B terminates. It continues to use, for the most part, as I said, the abandoned railroad corridor. It's a little bit easier to see in Google, so I'm just going to switch here for you guys. So Goodspeed Island Road is a roadway that provides access to a few homes south of Depot Street. That is where Phase 1B is. So that's kind of a shared space as it approaches Depot Street. It would continue similarly in a shared space along Railroad Avenue through coordination with fire and safety at the town. They'd prefer not to limit vehicular access along Railroad Avenue, so we're reconfiguring the space and taking a little bit of embankment that's still within the right-of-way to make the accommodation for the path adjacent to the two-way vehicular traffic without disturbing access to the properties along that point. We then have to cross Route 6. This is currently a 4-lane section, so we continue our coordination with MassDOT as they're in discussions with the town and adjacent towns about a potential road diet. There is a chance that this would reduce to either a three-lane section with 1 lane each direction and an alternating center, or it may even go to 1 lane per direction. So I'll get into a little bit more detail, but as we're assessing this crossing, we're currently taking that potential variability into account. Currently, 4 lanes could become as little as 2. It also currently has a signal just to the east at the intersection of Route 6 and Main Street. North of Railroad Avenue is where we re-enter the abandoned railroad corridor. So as I zoom out, you can kind of see that tree line that continues north. We'll cross Acushnet, which is a relatively low volume road. We'll pass the Holy Ghost grounds where we are designing a connection here. The town is looking to enhance this parcel to include some restroom facilities and other amenities that are a great counterpart to the construction of the path. So a connection there is a great attribute. We'll cross Park Street, which is also a relatively low volume road. And then as we continue north, they're actually underway with an extension of Park Lane. So this was a small residential development. The developer is extending that over here and building at least a couple more homes. So we're coordinating with that designer on elevations of this extended roadway and drainage as it needs to accommodate both projects simultaneously. North of that point, we enter a stretch that, as you can see in the mapping, has quite a bit of wetland. So we are taking into account everything that has been flagged by our permitting group, our wetland scientists. There's going to need to be mitigation for the improvements through this area. We then come up to the southern edge of 195. We'll hug that area kind of with a hook in the alignment. We acknowledge that there's a utility corridor that runs through here east-west as well. So making sure that we're avoiding anything that would impact embankment to the highway, but also understanding the access needed for those utilities. The project will then come to and run along North Street. North Street has higher volume, higher speed, and some limited visibility coming around this curve. So the intent is to carry the project along the west side, past MassDOT's facility entrance to the current park and ride on the west side of North Street, and then cross at this point where the cross section of North Street is down to just 1 lane per direction. We're on a tangent at that point, lower vehicular speeds. It'll definitely be a safer location. From there, that is supposed to be the terminus of our project, and then another phase would connect along the east side of North Street, continuing along Industrial Drive, and then over to the Marion Town line. As Bonnie was mentioning, the Marion project is expected to move a little bit quicker than ours since we are still finalizing that 25% submission to MassDOT. So we're also working with the town to potentially break out just this piece where we would cross North Street with an RRFB and maybe even build a very small portion of that um, path on the east side of North Street to make the ultimate connection to the next phase that would connect to Marion directly. So to get into a little bit more of the details, I'll jump back to this. Here are a couple images of areas where we would be on or crossing roadways. And then once we get into the rail corridor, much of it looks like this. There's a lot of overgrowth of vegetation. There are also some areas that are visibly wet, even in the current condition. As I mentioned, our wetland scientists who will be doing the permitting have gone out there and flagged everything. What we can tell from record plans and the existing topography within the primary extent of the corridor, the old rail bed, when it was intact, had some slope to it, cross slope, where the western edge was slightly lower in elevation than the eastern edge. It is apparent that there was an intent for there to be essentially like a swale running along that west side to keep water off of the tracks themselves. Over time, since the rail's been abandoned for decades, the water's kind of remigrated itself to where it can just kind of take over everything. But our intent is to reinstate a cross section that looks similar to the way it was before. So it may be a little bit hard to see, but this is graded, so it is downward to the west so that we can reestablish that drainage swale, try to keep much of the runoff off of the path. As we've discussed with the town, we understand that there may be some storms that will slightly inundate this western part of the path, but in the active moment of those heavy rain events, we don't expect a lot of people to be out trying to use the trail. We're just trying to make sure that the water can reabsorb into the swale and dissipate off the path within a few hours of the storm. I mentioned the crossing at Route 6. So as we've assessed this, we've looked at FHWA's step guide, the Safe Transportation for Every Pedestrian. Given the volume and speed of vehicles on Route 6, whether MassDOT does ultimately put in the road diet or if it doesn't go in place before this project comes through, Hawk or pedestrian hybrid beacon is a recommended alternative here. It also pairs well with the fact that there is that existing signal just to the east, a few hundred feet down the road at Route 6 in Main Street. The hybrid beacon and the existing signal can be timed in coordination so that our crossing here will not be an awkward hindrance to people trying to make their way down Route 6. We understand that if we did something where the two weren't coordinated, it would probably cause more frustration and therefore less of a safe condition. At the other roadway crossings, other than Route 6, that would not be signalized, we'll be introducing curved alignment with S-curves approaching from each side, similar to some other bike paths that PAR's done in the past. That helps alert the bicyclist users, the path users, that they're approaching a roadway. We will have stop approaches on the path itself, but plenty of advanced signing and striping on the roadways. And then I have an image of the design that we're looking at at North Street. So as I mentioned there at the terminus, while we are, north is actually to the left on this sheet. Sorry about that flip, but just to try to align everyone. So here's the park and ride. Just to the west of that, or the north of that, left on the sheet, is the access to MassDOT's facility. We'll be coming down that west side. We're going to be installing a split rail fence to try to make sure that people don't attempt to cross the road at Industrial Drive. As Phase 2B moves forward and makes its connection to Marion on the east side of North Street, we are hoping that they will also be adding a fence to that design. I don't believe that was in the plan that had developed previously, but that is something the town was looking to add. So on both sides of the road, there will be fencing indicating that pedestrians and bicyclists should not cross before they get to the intended point here at the park and ride. This gives us the opportunity as well to use the park and ride itself as a gateway, as a access point for the trail. This park and ride is significantly underutilized all days of the week, all times of the day. So we're coordinating with MassDOT as well to either directly stripe some of these spaces for use for the trail, or maybe just let it function openly for dual use between the park and ride function and the bike path access. I think the last thing I wanted to share, this is just a closer up of the Holy Ghost grounds. The two other elements that are advancing are both structural, and this is the last piece that needs to be finalized before MassDOT accepts the 25% is a complete submission. We had some initial feedback from Jean Bouchard, and they wanted us to take a section of the path that we were intending to install a boardwalk for. The boardwalk advanced through conversation with the Concom agent in an attempt to keep as much hydraulic connectivity between the two wetlands that currently exist along the east side and the west side of the path. This would allow us to cross over the point where they make a physical connection to keep that flow intact. However, the boardwalk structure, as our structural engineers started to advance it, would have to be relatively depth, even just for the 100-foot stretch we were looking at. So, as an alternative and as part of a type study that MassDOT requested, we are looking at a culvert in this location. So, the box culvert would also maintain that hydraulic connection. It would allow us to keep the path relatively level to the existing surface elevation that's there today. Otherwise, to fit in the depth of that structure, we would possibly need to elevate the path on either ends, having a little bit more horizontal impact to the wetland. So we'd kind of be fighting ourselves. We'd have more impact to try to maintain the hydraulic crossing. The box culvert should be able to maintain that. The other component we're looking at is for those areas through the wooded corridor where we do have wetland impacts, we need to make sure we're replicating that. So that wetland extends to the east. We would extend it even further towards the rear of MassDOT's maintenance facility. In doing so, we would then have to construct a wall because that wetland replication needs to maintain the existing elevation of the wetland. So there would be some cut. The retaining wall here is also part of that type study that MassDOT requested. We did look at concrete walls, we looked at MSE walls to try to limit the extent of foundation. We are mostly going to be advancing this as an MSE wall, and that has been coordinated with MassDOT's facility. They don't have any vehicles that drive behind this building, so they're not overly concerned with the type of wall. They just want to make sure that if people walk past there, there's some sort of pedestrian style railing at the top. So that is everything I had. If anybody has any questions, I could answer them now, or we could let that fourth presentation go and save everything till the end.
Thank you, Amy. Any questions? John?
Amy, I appreciate the presentation. Certainly looking forward to this project moving forward. Two things I just wanted to sort of bring up, and Amy, you might not have the answer, but maybe, if someone from MassDOT wants to chime in, there was talk about the potential road diet along Route 6 in that area. And so, I think my thought process is really just around the pedestrian hybrid beacon for Route 6 or the Hawk, and whether that might change based on how many lanes there are for that project once it is done. So I guess since the nearest traffic signal is like 250 feet to the east, it's obviously very close, and so I do anticipate that if it were to be a Hawk, and obviously if there was no road diet or anything, there might be some sort of conflicts there. So I would just, obviously as that project advances, if MassDOT has any sort of indication as to when that Route 6 project might take place, I think that sort of would be helpful here. And then I'll just chime in with my second point is just it's actually more of a transit related, but GATRA does have a sort of Wareham to New Bedford connection, and the bus stop for that is currently at North Street at Route 6.
Yep.
And so, I would just say for the town, obviously the town is investing a lot into the shared use path. And so it seems like it might make sense for better connectivity to the single bus stop in Mattapoisett to potentially consider relocating it to that sort of shared use path crossing for this project. So those are my only two comments.
Appreciate it. Thanks, John.
Looks like Bonnie has a question.
Yeah, thank you. Amy, thank you. That was really nice and clear, and it's good to see some more thinking about extending, getting across North Street and learning more about that. I want to second John's comment about the road diet. It's not only in Mattapoisett, it's Fairhaven, Mattapoisett, Marion, and Wareham. We're all interested in the road diet for safety reasons, and we'd love to hear more about it.